3 years back, I was watching some videos about the most infamous serial killers of this planet. The way the human brain works horrified me. But after a point of time, I had gotten used to the gruesome details of the modus operandi of the killers. I had eventually gotten tired of it. They decapitated their victims, they stabbed their victims multiple times, some shot their victims. But one particular serial killer and his terrible acts gave me chills. It gave me sleepless nights. I had never come across a killer so weird, so invested in detailing his crimes with his fetishes, and did unimaginable things to the bodies of his victims. He was a gay who mostly targeted African Americans, lured them into his trap, spiked their drinks, strangles them, chops up their body in his own bathtub, dissolves the remains in acid while storing some body parts that he admired in his refrigerator. He later cooks up the pieces of flesh to make sure that a part of them stays with him forever. A serial killer who shook the world. Hello to all the curious bees out there. Now sit back, plug in your earphones, and get ready to have your spine chill because this is the story of the Milwaukee cannibal. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st in the year 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. To Lionel Dahmer and his wife Joyce Dahmer. Jeff's father Lionel was an expert chemist who was mostly invested in his professional life, and he was not an integral part of his boy's childhood. Jeff's mum, Joyce, was a hypochondriac and suffered from depression and had her own set of mental illnesses. She took a lot of medication for her problems and eventually started to get addicted to them. Frequent arguments between the husband and wife, along with being neglected by both his parents. Jeffrey was deprived of attention and love as a child. Jeffrey eventually had to be operated for double hernia, and Lionel Dahmer says that this was the turning point for everything that was going to happen in Jeff's life. Even though he was left alone most of the time, Jeff used to be a happy and cheerful kid. But after this surgery, he suddenly became an aloof, timid, and quiet kid who started to isolate himself from people. The parents did their best to try and change him, but eventually thought that it was just a boy growing up and finding his true character. Jeffrey soon had a baby brother whom he named David. In May 1968, the family moved to the Bath Township in Ohio, owing to Lionel Dahmer's job. Their new home was almost in the middle of nowhere, a huge house surrounded with woods, completely isolated from the hustle and bustle of the city. Lionel was very much worried for his son as he wasn't showing signs of interest in almost anything. But one day, he saw his father working on some dead animal and experimenting with chemicals in it. Jeffrey was so hooked onto it and showed interest in learning about the animal body since he liked the sounds the bones were making. Lionel was happy that his son had interest in learning about animal anatomy and felt relieved that his aloof son showed interest in something at least. Lionel Dahmer then taught him about the animal body. But little did he know that these were the early signs of his wicked nature that would soon outgrow him, eventually taking over his entire life. Little did he know that his son would become one of the most infamous and hated serial killers of the world. Dahmer's fascination with dead bodies and dismembering them became so vast that it is said that Dahmer killed a dog before hitting a nail onto its head into a tree. Dahmer soon became a teenager and was about to discover something about himself, something that would change his life. Dahmer started to realize that he was not interested or attracted to girls. He soon discovered that he was gay He found it extremely difficult to accept it and disclose it to his parents at a time when homosexuality was frowned upon by people. He then often fantasized about completely dominating a partner during sexual intercourse, and soon these fantasies started to entangle itself with violence and death. Dahmer's parents were on the verge of getting a divorce, and they were constantly arguing at home all the time. He was already finding it difficult to come to terms with his sexuality and violent fantasies. Lionel Dahmer would often leave the house and wouldn't return for days while his wife was constantly on pills and lost her sober state. All of these pushed Dahmer to start looking for a source of escapism. He then started to drink heavily while he was still in school. He wasn't even 18. He would drink all day and night and even attend his classes while being sloshed. His grades eventually dropped, but he somehow managed to graduate from high school. By this time, Dahmer had become an alcoholic. The quarrel between the couple worsened, and soon they agreed upon mutual divorce. Dahmer had also just turned 18. Soon, Lionel Dahmer moved out of the house, followed by Joyce taking custody of Jeffrey's younger brother and leaving the house too. Now, the 18-year-old Dahmer, an alcoholic and homosexual man who fantasizes about killing and having sex with his partners, was left all alone in his huge house with his violent and brutal fantasies along with booze as his only dark companions. Weeks after his graduation, Jeffrey was driving home when he came across a young hitchhiker. Jeffrey had always had a fantasy of luring a young hitchhiker to his home before getting physical with him. For Jeffrey, this was a dream come true. He slowed down his car and asked the young hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks. He asked him if he wanted a ride. Hicks was actually on his way to a rock music festival when Jeffrey met him. And Jeffrey went on to ask Hicks if he would like to have a couple of beers and lift some weights for some time, after which he planned to drop him off at the festival. The 19-year-old Stephen found this idea to be fun and agreed. They reached Dahmer's home and had cans and cans of beers and were having a great time. After some time, Stephen thought it was finally time for him to leave, but Jeffrey did not want him to. Jeffrey wanted Stephen to stay with him forever. Jeffrey then bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, knocking Stephen unconscious. He then killed his first victim by strangling his neck. Jeffrey then stood on top of his naked body and did all that was necessary for his sexual gratification. The next day, however, Jeffrey was nervous. He had just killed a man. He was paranoid, fearing that the police might find him. He had to dispose the dead corpse of Stephen Hicks. He dissected Stephen's body in the basement of his house. He dissolved the flesh in acid and used a sledgehammer to crush his bones and scattered them around the woods behind his house. Dahmer constantly checked on the newspapers for several days to check whether the police had sniffed something about the murder, but not one word about a young hitchhiker disappearing had been published. Jeffrey felt relieved. He had successfully gotten away after killing his first victim, a 19-year-old boy. This gave Jeffrey an ounce of confidence which would lead to the death of 16 young men and boys and strip their dead corpses of any basic dignity. Jeff's father returned home soon after with his new fiancée, only to find his son rotting all alone while drinking like a fish. Lionel Dahmer enrolled Jeff in a university, but Jeff's problem with alcohol led to collapsing CGPAs and miserable academic failures. He eventually dropped out of university and enlisted in the United States Army, hoping that he could get his life back on track. He was soon enlisted as a combat medic for over a year, but his drinking problems started wreaking havoc in his life yet again. His performance hit rock bottom, and some of his colleagues even accused Dahmer of spiking their drinks and made sexual moves on them. He was soon discharged from the army and received an honorable discharge. In fear of facing his father after continuous dishonors and failures, Jeffrey moved to Miami, Florida, hoping to have a fresh start. He did menial jobs and spent his time drinking when his father called him, asking him to return to Ohio. He moved in with his father and stepmother. Soon after, Jeffrey kept running into troubles owing to his alcohol addiction again, and Lionel Dahmer grew frustrated about his drinking habit and decided to send him to his grandmother's house in Milwaukee to discipline him. At Milwaukee, he worked at a chocolate factory and did other odd jobs to make ends meet. It was here that he started frequenting gay bars and clubs in search of a sexual partner he met. He met a lot of men and used to bring them over to his grandmother's place late at night. His grandmother hated this behavior of Jeffrey but did nothing other than advising Jeffrey, which he brushed off his shoulder obviously. On November 20th of 1987, Jeffrey met a 25-year-old man named Stephen Tuomi. He then lured him to his room that he had rented in the Ambassador Hotel. They started drinking and soon they were completely tanked and sloshed. And Jeffrey woke up the next morning only to find Stephen Tuomi lying beneath him with bruises all over his body and blood from his mouth. Stephen Tuomi was dead. Now, according to Dahmer, he did not intend to kill Stephen and maintained till the very last day that he had no idea how he killed Stephen. Now, whether this was intentional or something that happened as a result of excessive drinking and a brawl does not matter. What matters is that this incident triggered the monster that was sleeping inside the mind of Jeffrey Dahmer. It woke up after years of hibernation. The monster in his mind that made Jeffrey kill Stephen Hicks was now awake. The horrific things the monstrous mind of Jeffrey Dahmer resulted in will give you sleepless nights and make you question the ways in which a human mind can work. Get ready to witness Jeffrey Dahmer's transformation into the Milwaukee cannibal in the next episode of The B Show. And that's it for today's episode of The B Show. Keep the fire of curiosity burning inside you for eternity and peace out. Sleep tight and watch out for the next episode of the Jeffrey Dahmer series. Peace out.